You are a podcaster. The words cut through the hearing room like a blade, each syllable sharpened by 3.5 decades of political combat. Maxine Waters sat forward in her chair, her eyes locked on the man across from her, her voice rising with the controlled fury that had become her signature, her brand, her weapon of choice in a city built on performance and power. A podcaster who kissed the ring and got a badge for his trouble. You have no business in that chair. You are not FBI. You have never been FBI. You are a talk show host playing dress-up in a government building, and every single American watching this circus should be absolutely terrified that the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the premier law enforcement agency in the most powerful nation on Earth, has a media personality as its deputy director. The gallery shifted. Phones came up. On the dais, Republican members exchanged glances that said they knew exactly what they were watching. A moment being manufactured, a clip being created, a viral explosion being engineered in real time. Democratic members nodded, some with conviction, others with the performative solidarity that politics demands when cameras are rolling and party loyalty is being tested. The hearing room hummed with electricity, the kind that accompanies a Maxine Waters appearance. Because everyone in that room, from the freshman congressman to the veteran reporter in the back row, knew exactly what this was. Theater. High-stakes political theater with real consequences, and Waters was the star, the director, and the producer all at once. Dan Bongino sat at the witness table. He did not move. He did not reach for his water glass. He did not look to his attorney. He did not shift his weight or clear his throat or do any of the 1,000 small things people do when they're being verbally assaulted in front of millions of viewers. He sat the way a police officer sits when a suspect is screaming during an interrogation. Still, patient, absorbing every word, cataloging every phrase for future use. He waited until she finished. He let the silence settle. 2 full seconds, long enough for the cameras to capture the contrast. Her fury versus his stillness, her volume versus his quiet, her emotion versus his control. Then he opened a folder. "Congresswoman Waters," he said, and his voice was flat, unhurried, the voice of Queens, New York. The voice of a man who spent 4 years as an NYPD officer and 12 years as a Secret Service agent. The voice of a man who learned early that in a room full of shouting, the person who speaks quietest is the person everyone actually hears. "I appreciate the passion. I'd like to read something into the record if the chairman permits." The chairman nodded. Federal Election Commission filing. Committee name, Citizens for Waters. Between the years 2003 and 2023, your campaign committee paid a total of $1,213,000 to a company called Progressive Connections. The payment category listed on every single filing is Slate mailer management fees. Progressive Connections is a fictitious business name. It's registered to your daughter, Corinne Waters. He looked up from the folder. $1.2 million from your donors to your daughter over 20 years. For pamphlets. The hearing room changed. Not dramatically. No gasps, no murmurs, no gavel. It changed the way a room changes when someone flips a light switch in a dark corner and everyone suddenly sees what's been sitting there all along. A shift in attention, a realignment of focus, a recalibration of power dynamics. The cameras that had been pointed at Waters during her opening tirade swiveled to Bongino and stayed there. Waters opened her mouth. Nothing came out. It was the first time in 35 years of public life. 35 years of calling presidents racist, 35 years of demanding impeachments, 35 years of telling cabinet members they weren't welcome in restaurants. The first time Maxine Waters had nothing to say. The silence lasted 3 seconds. In politics, 3 seconds of silence from Maxine Waters is an event of geological significance. To understand how it happened, how the woman who built an empire on righteous indignation found herself speechless in front of a man reading her own financial disclosures, you have to go back 4 hours. Back to the morning when Maxine Waters still believed she was the prosecutor and Dan Bongino was the defendant. She arrived at the Rayburn building at 7:45, which was early for her. Waters was not a morning person. She was a performance person, and performances require preparation. Hair, wardrobe, the selection of the right glasses that communicate seriousness but also style. The review of talking points she would never actually use because Maxine Waters had never in her entire life needed talking points. She had instinct. She had volume. She had 3 decades of never being seriously challenged by anyone who mattered. Her chief of staff, a careful man named Michael Moore, had prepared a briefing packet. It contained Bongino's public statements, his podcast clips, his 3 failed congressional campaigns, his social media posts, and a summary of his appointment as FBI Deputy Director by Kash Patel. The packet was organized around a single theme. Bongino is a podcaster who has no business running the FBI. Hit the credentials, Moore said. Hard, over and over. Podcaster, talk show host, not FBI. The media will run with it. By this afternoon, every news chyron in the country will say Waters confronts unqualified FBI Deputy Director. That's the win. Waters flipped through the packet without really reading it. She didn't need to. She'd been doing this since before Michael Moore was born. She knew how congressional hearings worked. You pick a line of attack. You deliver it with maximum volume and conviction. The cameras capture the moment. The news cycle does the rest. The substance didn't matter. The clip mattered. The narrative mattered. The headline mattered. He's a podcaster, she said. End of story. What Waters didn't know, because she hadn't read the briefing packet closely enough, and because her staff hadn't researched Bongino's career beyond the podcast, and because 35 years of never being challenged had made her incurious about the people she attacked, was that Dan Bongino had been a police officer in one of the most violent neighborhoods in America before she'd ever heard his name. She didn't know about the 75th Precinct in East New York, Brooklyn. She didn't know about the Financial Fraud Task Force. She didn't know about the Department of Justice Award. She didn't know he'd protected Barack Obama. And she especially didn't know that a man who had spent years investigating financial fraud for the United States Secret Service, who had built cases against people who hide money in shell companies and route payments through family businesses, was the absolute worst possible opponent for a congresswoman whose daughter had been collecting campaign money for 2 decades. 3 miles away, in a secure office at FBI headquarters on Pennsylvania Avenue, Bongino sat with his general counsel, a career DOJ attorney named Marcus Webb, and 2 analysts who had spent the previous week building what Bongino called, in the blunt language of a Queens cop, the receipt folder. She's going to call you a podcaster, Webb said. That's her only play. She doesn't know your background. Her staff thinks you're a TV personality who got a political appointment. Good, Bongino said. Let her. What's your plan when she goes after your credentials? Precinct 75. Financial Fraud Task Force. Presidential Protection Division. Obama, I lay it all out flat. No drama, like I'm reading a resume at a job interview. The contrast does the work. She's screaming, I'm reading facts. And then Bongino opened a laptop. On the screen was a spreadsheet. 20 years of Federal Election Commission filings organized chronologically. Citizens for Waters, Progressive Connections, Karen Waters, dollar amounts highlighted in yellow, each one verified against public FEC records. Then I read her the receipts. Webb studied the spreadsheet. 1.2 million over 20 years for pamphlets. Bongino nodded. Slate mailers. She's the only federal politician in America who uses them at this scale. The only one. And the person running the operation is her daughter. Her donors, people in South Central, Inglewood, Compton, some of the poorest zip codes in California, give her money to fight for them. And she sends it to her kid. He closed the laptop. She's built a 35-year brand as the voice of the poor. I'm going to show that she's been using the poor as a business model. Not with opinions, not with insults, with FEC filings, public records, numbers that anyone with an internet connection can verify. Webb nodded slowly. She'll play the race card, she always does. And when she does, I'll remind her that I started my career in East New York, 98% minority, one of the poorest neighborhoods in the country, and that I protected Barack Obama with my life. Let her explain how a man who served a black neighborhood and guarded a black president is a racist. She'll say you're attacking a black woman who's fought for her community. And I'll say I'm reading FEC filings. That's it. FEC filings. If reading public records is an attack, then the Federal Election Commission is the real enemy. He paused. Then, in the voice of a cop who has seen too much to be surprised by anything, but who still, despite everything, gets angry at the people who prey on the vulnerable. She lives in Hancock Park, $5 million house, 6,000 square feet. Her district has a 27% poverty rate. She doesn't even live in the district. She lives in a mansion next to the old J. Paul Getty estate, and she calls herself a warrior for the poor. I walked a beat in East New York. I lived near the people I served. I know what poverty looks like because I saw it every morning and every night. Not from a mansion in Hancock Park, from the street. He stood up and began pacing, the restless movement of a man who spent years on his feet, on a beat in formation. Not a desk politician. A street cop who happened to end up behind a desk. Here's what people don't understand about financial fraud. When a CEO steals from a pension fund, when a banker fabricates loan documents, the victims are always the same people. The people who can least afford to lose. Working people, retirees, small investors, the poor. The fraud doesn't happen in mansions. It lands in neighborhoods like East New York, in districts like the 43rd. And when I look at Waters' record, not her speeches, not her Twitter posts, her actual financial record, I see a pattern I've seen 100 times as a financial fraud investigator. Money comes in from small donors who believe in a cause. Money goes out to family members through entities that provide questionable value. The operation is technically legal, and the people who funded it never know where their money went. That's not corruption in the criminal sense. I'm not saying she committed a crime. I'm saying it's a betrayal, and the people she betrayed are the ones she claims to fight for. Webb looked at the file one more time. What about the SBF angle? Bongino pulled up a screenshot. Waters' tweet from December 2nd, 2022. We appreciate that you've been candid in your discussions about what happened at FTX. Below it, a photograph of Waters and Sam Bankman-Fried at a conference in the Bahamas, arms around each other, both smiling broadly. She was the chair of the House Financial Services Committee, the committee with oversight over crypto exchanges. SBF and his executives gave $300,000 to 9 members of her committee. He gave $40 million to Democrats overall. And when his platform collapsed and $8 billion disappeared, she thanked him for being honest. 7 months later, convicted on 7 federal counts, 25 years. She was supposed to be the watchdog. She was the lapdog. The hearing began at 10. Chairman Jim Jordan called the room to order and read the standard opening. The committee would hear testimony from FBI Deputy Director Dan Bongino regarding ongoing reforms at the Bureau under Director Kash Patel. The first 90 minutes were routine. Republican members asked about the pipe bomb investigation, the restructuring of field offices, and the new emphasis on violent crime. Democratic members asked about political targeting, the departure of career agents, and the demand for names of agents involved in January 6th investigations. Bongino answered each question in the same flat, precise tone, the tone of a man giving a briefing, not performing for cameras. Then Chairman Jordan recognized Maxine Waters for 5 minutes. Waters was not a member of the Judiciary Committee, but Jordan had agreed, with the particular generosity of a chairman who knows the opposition is about to make a mistake, to allow her to question the witness as a courtesy. Waters adjusted her glasses. She did not look at notes. She did not need to. Mr. Bongino, she began, and the Mr. was deliberate, a refusal to use his title, a small act of disrespect designed to establish the power dynamic from the first syllable. You are not an FBI agent. You have never been an FBI agent. The position of deputy director has been held by career FBI agents for 117 years. You broke that tradition, not because you earned it, not because you had the qualifications, but because you were a loyal supporter of Donald Trump on your podcast and he rewarded you. Is that an accurate summary of how you got this job? Bongino leaned toward his microphone. No, Congresswoman, it's not. Would you like me to tell you how I actually got here? I didn't ask for your life story, I asked. I'll keep it brief. He didn't wait for permission. In 1995, I was 19 years old. I entered the NYPD Police Cadet Program at the City University of New York. In 1997, I became a full-time police officer. I was assigned to the 75th Precinct in East New York, Brooklyn. He paused, not for drama. Bongino didn't do drama, for emphasis. For those who don't know, the 75th Precinct covered one of the highest crime neighborhoods in the United States. In the late 90s, East New York had a murder rate that made national news. I patrolled those streets. I responded to domestic violence calls at 2 in the morning. I knew the families. I knew the kids. I knew who was selling and who was buying and who was getting hurt. In 1999, I joined the United States Secret Service as a special agent. I was assigned to the New York field office and then to the Financial Fraud Task Force, where I investigated white-collar criminals, people who steal money through sophisticated schemes and route it through shell companies and family businesses. I received a Department of Justice award for the successful investigation and prosecution of financial fraud. He turned a page in his folder, though he wasn't reading from it. He was letting the camera see the gesture. In 2006, I joined the Presidential Protective Division. I was assigned to protect the President of the United States. I served on the detail for President George W. Bush, and then I stayed on and served on the detail for President Barack Obama. 2 presidents, 2 parties. Both trusted me with their lives. After that, I transferred to the Baltimore field office, where I served as the lead agent on a multi-million-dollar fraud investigation that resulted in successful federal prosecutions. I have a bachelor's degree and a master's degree from the City University of New York and a master's degree from Penn State University. I've been in law enforcement for 13 years. He looked directly at Waters. So with respect, Congresswoman, I'm not a podcaster who got a badge. I'm a law enforcement officer who had a podcast. I gave up a show that reached 20 million people a month to take a government salary. What podcaster does that? The hearing room recalibrated. Waters' staff, watching from a row behind the dais, sensed the shift. The almost imperceptible change in the room's attention that occurs when a witness stops being a target and starts being a threat. Moore texted Waters' press secretary. He came prepared. She needs to pivot. Waters didn't pivot. She had spent 35 years not pivoting. Pivoting was for politicians who were afraid. Maxine Waters was not afraid. Mr. Bongino, your resume doesn't change the fact that you and Kash Patel are weaponizing the FBI for Donald Trump's personal. Congresswoman, since you've raised the subject of weaponizing public trust for personal benefit, I'd like to enter something into the record. The phrase public trust for personal benefit landed like a door opening onto a room Waters didn't want anyone to see. She heard it. The gallery heard it. The cameras heard it. Bongino opened his folder. Federal Election Commission filings. Committee, Citizens for Waters, Payee Progressive Connections. A company registered to your daughter, Corinne Waters. Payments, Slate Mailer Management Fees. Total between 2003 and 2023, $1,213,000. He read the numbers the way a cop reads a booking sheet. Flat, clinical, letting the facts do the work. In the 2020 election cycle alone, your campaign paid your daughter $250,000. In the 2022 cycle, $192,300. In 2021, not even an election year, $74,000. Congresswoman, slate mailing is an uncommon practice in federal elections. In fact, during the 2020 general election, you were reportedly the only federal politician in the entire United States running a slate mailer operation at this scale. The only one. And the person managing it was your daughter. He set down the folder. Your campaign donors, many of them from one of the poorest congressional districts in California, gave you money to fight for them. Your campaign gave over $1 million of that money to your daughter for pamphlets. Now, I wouldn't normally bring this up in a hearing about FBI operations, but you've accused me of abusing public trust. So let me ask, when Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington, not a Republican organization, not a conservative think tank, but a liberal watchdog group, named you one of the most corrupt members of Congress 4 times in 2005, 2006, 2009, and 2011, was that weaponization too? Waters's hand hit the desk. This is a distraction. This is an attack on a black woman who has fought for her community for 35 years. You come in here with your Congresswoman, I'm not attacking anyone. I'm reading FEC filings. These are public records. Anyone in this room can look them up on the Federal Election Commission's website tonight. Your donors gave you money. Your campaign gave $1.2 million of that money to your daughter. Those are facts. If you'd like to explain why your daughter was the only person in America running a slate mailer operation for a federal campaign at this scale, I'm genuinely interested in the answer. Waters did not provide the answer. She stared at Bongino with the look of a woman who has been in 1,000 fights, but has never, in any of them, been hit with her own financial disclosures. Bongino continued. The tone didn't change, it never changed. That was the weapon, the monotone, the flatness. The cop voice that treats a $1 million revelation the same way it treats a parking ticket. No theatrics, no raised voice, just receipts. And since we're discussing the relationship between your public service and your family's finances, Congresswoman, let me add one more item. In September 2008, you arranged a meeting between Treasury Department officials and executives of One United Bank. Your husband, Sidney Williams, was a former member of the bank's board of directors and a stockholder. The bank had invested heavily in Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac and was on the verge of collapse. One United received $12 million in TARP bailout funds, $12 million in taxpayer money. And if the bank had not received that money, I'm quoting the Ethics Committee's own report, your husband's investment would have been worthless. The House Ethics Committee charged you with 3 violations of the Code of Official Conduct. 3. You told the committee you had recused yourself, but your Chief of Staff, Michael Moore, your grandson, continued to advocate for One United on your behalf. The committee cleared you. Your grandson received a letter of reproval instead. He paused just long enough. Congresswoman, I investigated financial fraud for the United States Secret Service. I built cases against people who use intermediaries to avoid accountability. The pattern is always the same. The principal claims they didn't know. The subordinate takes the blame, and the money stays in the family. I'm not questioning the committee's decision. I'm inviting the American people to draw their own conclusions. Waters erupted. I was cleared unanimously, 10-0. The committee found I did nothing wrong. You were cleared because your grandson said he acted without your knowledge, while working in your office, under your supervision, for a bank your husband owned stock in. And the grandson was the one who received the reproval, not you. You walked away clean. And the 24-year-old staffer who happened to be your grandson took the hit. That's not justice, Congresswoman. That's a family business. The phrase hung in the air, family business. It connected the dots, the daughter collecting $1.2 million in campaign money, the husband's bank getting $12 million in bailout funds, the grandson absorbing the ethics violation, 3 family members, 3 revenue streams, all flowing through the same elected official. Bongino shifted slightly, the way a boxer shifts his weight before the combination that ends the fight. Congresswoman, you've built your career as a voice for the poor. Your district, California's 43rd, includes parts of South Central Los Angeles, Inglewood, Gardena, Compton. The poverty rate in parts of your district is 27%, double the national average. These are communities where families live on $30,000 a year, where kids go to schools that haven't been renovated since the 90s, where the streets your constituents walk every day look nothing like the street you live on, because you don't live in your district. You live in Hancock Park, a 6,000-square-foot mansion valued at nearly $5 million. Your neighbors include the former estate of oil magnate J. Paul Getty. Your home sits outside the boundaries of the 43rd Congressional District. I started my career in East New York, Brooklyn, Precinct 75. The people there lived in walk-ups and housing projects. I didn't commute in from a mansion to police their neighborhood. I was there every shift, every call. I saw poverty the way your constituents see it, up close, every day, with no gate between me and it. So when you call yourself a warrior for the poor, Congresswoman, when you've collected $1.2 million for your daughter from your campaign, when your husband's bank got $12 million in taxpayer bailout money, when you live in a mansion outside the district you claim to represent, the people in South Central and Inglewood and Compton might reasonably ask, who exactly are you fighting for? And Congresswoman, since we're discussing South Central in 1992, when the Rodney King verdict came down, your district erupted. 63 people died. Over 2,000 were injured. 12,000 were arrested. Reginald Denny was pulled from his truck and beaten nearly to death with a cinder block on a street in the district you represent. You led a chant of no justice, no peace. You called it a rebellion, not a riot. You said it was understandable. That was 33 years ago. The poverty rate in your district hasn't meaningfully changed since then. South Central still bears the scars. And somewhere between 1992 and today, you moved to a $5 million mansion in Hancock Park, a few miles and an entire world away from the people whose rebellion you championed. Waters had been building toward an explosion for 3 minutes. It arrived now. This man, this administration, is destroying democracy. They are locking up journalists. They are weaponizing every agency in this government. They are targeting black leaders. And you sit there in a chair that doesn't belong to you, reading opposition research about my family while this country burns. Bongino waited. He had learned in the NYPD that when someone is shouting, the worst thing you can do is shout back. You wait. You let the shouting echo off the walls, and then you speak quietly, because quiet after shouting is the loudest sound in the world. Congresswoman, you've raised the subject of threats to democracy. I'd like to discuss your own record on that topic. He opened to a tabbed section of his folder. June 23, 2018. Los Angeles. You made the following statement, and I'm quoting from video. If you see anybody from that cabinet in a restaurant, in a department store, at a gasoline station, you get out and you create a crowd and you push back on them and you tell them they're not welcome anymore anywhere. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, a Democrat, Congresswoman, not a Republican, responded the following day. Quote, "No one should call for the harassment of political opponents. That's not right. That's not American. Your own party's leader in the Senate said what you did was un-American. Not my words, his." He turned a page. April 17, 2021. Brooklyn Center, Minnesota. The Derek Chauvin trial was days from verdict. Tensions were at a breaking point. George Floyd's family was waiting for justice. And you traveled to Minnesota and told a crowd of protesters, quote, "We've got to stay on the street and we've got to get more confrontational. We've got to make sure that they know that we mean business." The judge presiding over the Chauvin trial, Judge Peter Cahill, made the following statement from the bench. "I wish elected officials would stop talking about this case, especially in a manner that is disrespectful to the rule of law and to the judicial branch." He called the behavior by elected officials abhorrent. And he told the defense, and I quote, "Congresswoman Waters may have given you something on appeal that may result in this whole trial being overturned." Bongino set down the folder. George Floyd's family wanted justice. A jury was deliberating, and a sitting member of Congress flew to Minnesota and told a crowd to get more confrontational. A statement so inflammatory that the presiding judge said it could have resulted in the entire trial being thrown out. Not because you cared about justice, because you wanted a camera moment. The Republican minority moved to censure you. Democrats voted it down, 216 to 210, along party lines. Not because your comments were acceptable, even the judge called them abhorrent, but because your party couldn't afford the political cost. Waters was breathing hard. Her hands were flat on the desk. Her staff, watching from behind the dais, had stopped texting. Bongino spoke one more time. The voice hadn't changed, hadn't risen, hadn't wavered. "And one more thing, Congresswoman. since you've spent this hearing lecturing me about corruption and abuse of power. In November 2022, Sam Bankman-Fried presided over the collapse of FTX. $8 billion in customer funds vanished. Pensioners, small investors, working families, people who trusted a platform that celebrity endorsements told them was safe, gone. You were the chair of the House Financial Services Committee, the committee with direct oversight over exactly this kind of fraud. And here is what you said on Twitter on December 2nd, 2022, 3 weeks after $8 billion disappeared. We appreciate that you've been candid in your discussions about what happened at FTX. Candid, the man who stole $8 billion was candid. You thanked him. Sam Bankman-Fried and FTX executives donated over $40 million to Democratic candidates and groups during the 2022 cycle. $300,000 went directly to 9 members of the House Financial Services Committee. Your committee. There are photographs of you and Bankman-Fried at an FTX conference in the Bahamas, arms around each other, smiling. 7 months after you called him candid, he was convicted on 7 federal charges, including wire fraud, conspiracy, and money laundering. He's serving 25 years in federal prison. You called a man who stole $8 billion candid. And then you came to this hearing and called me a threat to justice. Congresswoman, I investigated financial criminals for the United States Secret Service. I know what fraud looks like. I know how it operates. I know the pattern, the scheme, the cover, the enablers who look the other way because the money is flowing in the right direction. And I know what it looks like when the people who are supposed to hold criminals accountable are too compromised to do their jobs. The hearing room was still. The kind of still that happens when a large number of people simultaneously realize they are witnessing something that will be discussed for a long time. Chairman Jordan sat with his hands folded, making no move to intervene. Democratic members stared at various points on the wall or the ceiling, the gaze of politicians who are calculating the distance between themselves and the blast radius. Bongino looked at Waters one last time. Let me summarize the record, Congresswoman. Since you asked about my qualifications to sit in this chair, between 2003 and 2023, your campaign paid your daughter $1.2 million for pamphlets. Your husband's bank received $12 million in taxpayer bailout funds after you arranged a meeting with Treasury. You were charged with 3 ethics violations. Your grandson took the reproval. A liberal watchdog group named you one of the most corrupt members of Congress 4 separate times. You live in a $5 million mansion outside the district you represent, a district where the poverty rate is 27%. You told Americans to harass cabinet members in restaurants. Your own party leader called it un-American. You told protesters to get more confrontational during a murder trial. The judge called your behavior abhorrent and said you nearly caused a mistrial. And you called a man who stole $8 billion candid, 3 weeks after the money disappeared, and 7 months before he was convicted on 7 counts of federal fraud. I started my career walking a beat in East New York, Brooklyn, Precinct 75. The people there didn't live in mansions. They didn't have daughters collecting million-dollar campaign contracts. They didn't get bailouts when their investments went bad. They were the people you claimed to represent from a $5 million house in Hancock Park. You've spent 35 years building a brand as a champion of the poor. But the poor in your district are still poor. The poverty rate is still 27%. The schools are still failing. The streets are still dangerous. And the only people who have gotten rich from Maxine Waters' career in public service are Maxine Waters and her family. I don't need to be lectured about justice by someone who thanked a man who stole $8 billion. I don't need to be lectured about qualifications by someone whose greatest financial achievement is funneling $1 million to her daughter for pamphlets. And I don't need to be lectured about democracy by someone whose own party leader said her rhetoric was not American. I protected 2 presidents. I investigated financial fraud. I walked the beat in one of the poorest neighborhoods in this country. I know what service looks like. And what you've done for 35 years, Congresswoman, isn't service. It's a business. Silence. Chairman Jordan let it hold for 4 seconds. Then the gentlewoman's time has expired. Waters was already standing. "How dare you? I have fought for 35 years." The gavel came down. The gentlewoman's time has expired. She stood at the dais for another moment, her hand gripping the edge of the desk, her mouth open around a sentence that wouldn't come. Then she gathered her papers, though she hadn't looked at them once, and walked out of the hearing room. Her staff followed. She did not stop for reporters. She did not stop for cameras. She turned left down the hallway and disappeared into the marble corridor. For 8 minutes, no member of the Congressional Black Caucus posted anything on social media. In an institution where political communication is measured in seconds, 8 minutes of silence is an event without precedent. The clip traveled the way all congressional hearing clips travel in the modern age. Not as a single piece of footage, but as a series of fragments, each one optimized for a different audience and a different platform. The first fragment was the FEC filing reading, 37 seconds, Bongino's flat voice reading the numbers, $1,213,000, Progressive Connections, Karen Waters, pamphlets. It hit 15 million views by dinner time. Someone on X overlaid the numbers on a split screen with images of South Central Los Angeles, boarded storefronts, potholed streets, a homeless encampment 3 blocks from a school. The split screen went viral independently of the original clip. The second fragment was the credentials reversal, 24 seconds. I walked a beat in East New York, Precinct 75. The people there didn't live in mansions. Someone found Bongino's old NYPD precinct photo from 1998. A kid in a blue uniform with a crew cut, standing outside the 75th Precinct Station House on Sutter Avenue. The photo was shared alongside a satellite image of Waters' Hancock Park mansion. No commentary needed. The third was the SBF moment. 19 seconds. You called a man who stole $8 billion candid. Someone dug up Waters' original tweet and placed it next to Bankman-Fried's mugshot and his 25-year sentence. The juxtaposition was devastating. Candid became a hashtag. The fourth, the one that did the most damage, was the closing. The full summary, every item in sequence. Daughter, 1.2 million. Husband's bank, 12 million. Ethics violations, 3. Crew, most corrupt, 4 times. Mansion, 5 million outside the district. Get more confrontational. Judge said abhorrent. SBF, candid, then convicted. 2 minutes and 14 seconds. It was shared 41 million times in 48 hours. Waters held a press conference 3 hours after the hearing. She stood in the Rayburn Building hallway, flanked by 5 members of the Congressional Black Caucus, and delivered a statement that had been revised 4 times in the interim. "What you witnessed today," she said, "was a racist attack on a black woman who has spent 35 years fighting for her community. Dan Bongino is a political operative installed by Donald Trump to weaponize the FBI against black leaders and progressive voices. His performance today was not oversight. It was character assassination, and I will not be silenced." The statement was factually precise in the way that political statements often are when the underlying facts are indefensible. It addressed the characterization of the attack without addressing the content. Waters called it racist. She called it weaponized. She called it character assassination. But she didn't address the 1.2 million. She didn't address One United. She didn't address the mansion. She didn't address Candid. And by the time the press conference aired, 30 million people had already watched Bongino read the FEC filings, which meant that 30 million people noticed what she didn't say. The racist attack narrative encountered an immediate structural problem. Bongino had started his career in East New York, a neighborhood that was 98% black and Hispanic, and had protected Barack Obama. He hadn't mentioned race once during the hearing. He had mentioned FEC filings, ethics committee reports, Judge Cahill's statements, and Chuck Schumer's quote. Every source he cited was either a government document or a Democrat. The race card, which had protected Waters for 35 years, didn't work against a man who had served a black neighborhood, guarded a black president, and quoted a Democratic Senate leader. The most unexpected reaction came from Waters' own constituents, not from political operatives or media figures, but from the people who lived in the 43rd Congressional District. The people whose donations had funded the payments to Karen Waters. A woman who ran a laundromat in Inglewood posted a video that was viewed 9 million times. She was standing in her shop, still wearing her work apron, and she spoke directly to the camera. "I've donated to Maxine Waters 3 times, $50 each time. I thought it was going to help the community, literacy programs, job training, something. You're telling me my $50 went to her daughter for pamphlets, 1.2 million for pamphlets. I press shirts for $8 an hour. Do you know how many shirts that is?" A retired teacher from Compton wrote a letter to the Los Angeles Times that was published 3 days later. "I've lived in this district for 41 years. The poverty rate when Maxine Waters took office was high. It's still high. The schools were struggling then. They're struggling now. She's been our representative for 35 years, and the only thing that's changed is the value of her house, which isn't even in our district. I'm not angry at the FBI man. I'm angry at myself for not asking these questions sooner." A pastor from South Central, a man who had endorsed Waters in every election since 1996, gave an interview to a local news station and said something that was shorter and more devastating than anything said in the hearing room. 1.2 million is 24,000 textbooks. It's 600 scholarships for kids in our community. It went to pamphlets for her daughter. I need to pray on that. The math became its own viral moment. 24,000 textbooks, 600 scholarships, 1,200 laptops. That's what $1.2 million buys in a community with a 27% poverty rate. The contrast between the number and the purpose. Pamphlets versus textbooks. Karen Waters versus the children of the 43rd District was the kind of simple arithmetic that no amount of political spin could obscure. True, the liberal watchdog group that had named Waters one of the most corrupt members of Congress 4 times, issued a statement confirming their prior reports. Our findings from 2005 through 2011 regarding Representative Waters's financial relationships with family members through campaign and official activities remain part of the public record. The pattern documented in those reports is consistent with the FEC filings cited during today's hearing. The FTX Candid clip became a case study in a different kind of failure. Waters had called Bankman-Fried candid on December 2, 2022, 3 weeks after $8 billion in customer funds disappeared. She had done so publicly on Twitter as the chair of the committee responsible for financial oversight. When someone assembled a timeline, the story told itself. November 11th, FTX collapse, $8 billion gone. December 2nd, Waters calls SBF candid. December 12th, SBF arrested in Bahamas. March 2024, SBF convicted on 7 counts. November 2024, SBF sentenced to 25 years. The timeline told a story that required no commentary. The person responsible for oversight thanked the person responsible for the crime. The deeper damage wasn't about any single dollar amount or any single statement. It was about the gap between the brand and the record. For 35 years, Maxine Waters had occupied a specific space in American politics. The fearless black congresswoman who speaks truth to power, who calls out racism, who fights for the poor, who demands accountability from the powerful. Auntie Maxine, the icon, the warrior. But icons survive on mythology, and mythology survives on the absence of scrutiny. What Bongino had done with FEC filings, not opinions, with government reports, not accusations, with the words of a Democratic Senate leader and a presiding judge, not partisan talking points, was subject the mythology to arithmetic. And the arithmetic didn't work. A warrior for the poor whose daughter collected $1.2 million from her campaign. A champion of accountability whose grandson absorbed her ethics violation. A voice of justice who thanked a man who stole $8 billion. A representative of the people who lives in a $5 million mansion outside the district she represents. A critic of incitement who told crowds to get more confrontational, earning a rebuke from a judge who called her behavior abhorrent. A defender of norms whose own party leader called her rhetoric not American. Bongino didn't call her a criminal, he didn't call her corrupt, he didn't call her racist, which would have been absurd, and he knew it. He called her something more precise and more damaging, something that connected all the dots. The daughter, the husband, the grandson, the mansion, the donors, the poverty rate, into a single devastating image. He didn't use the words. He was too disciplined for that. But the picture he painted, a woman who built a career on the suffering of the poor while her family extracted millions from the system her career was supposed to reform, was the picture that tells the story. And once the picture was assembled, once the FEC filings and the Ethics Committee reports and the property records and the judge's rebuke and the SBF timeline were laid out in sequence, the picture couldn't be unassembled. Bongino returned to FBI headquarters after the hearing. He didn't hold a press conference. He didn't post on social media. He went back to work. There were cases to review, operations to coordinate, the day-to-day business of being the second highest-ranking official in the most powerful law enforcement agency in the country. Business that doesn't trend on social media because it's the kind of boring, essential, unglamorous work that doesn't generate clips. When Webb asked him how he thought it went, Bongino said, "I read receipts, that's it. I didn't write the FEC filings. I didn't write the Ethics Committee report. I didn't write Judge Cahill's statement. She wrote her own record over 35 years. I just read it back to her in front of 40 million people. The people in her district deserve to hear it. They've been paying for it." In the weeks that followed, Waters did what she had always done. She gave interviews. She posted on social media. She called the hearing a racist ambush and compared it to the attacks on every black leader who dares to speak truth. The machine still worked. The donations still came. The base still rallied. MSNBC still booked her. CNN still quoted her. But something had shifted. The same kind of shift that follows all of these moments. Not a collapse, but a crack. Not an earthquake, but a settling of the foundation that changes how the structure bears weight. The crack was in the pause. The moment of hesitation when a donor considers writing a check and remembers the 1.2 million. The moment when an ally considers a joint press conference and remembers Candid. The moment when a constituent hears "I'm fighting for you" and thinks your daughter got $1 million and my kid's school doesn't have air conditioning. She walked into the hearing room as Auntie Maxine, the icon, the warrior, the voice of the voiceless. She walked out as a line item in her own financial disclosures, read aloud by a cop from East New York who had learned in the streets and in the Secret Service and in the FBI that the most powerful weapon in law enforcement isn't a badge or a gun or a shouted accusation. It's a receipt. And in the 43rd Congressional District of California, in the laundromats and the barber shops, and the schools without air conditioning, and the streets that still haven't been repaved since the rebellion of 1992, people who had never thought to look up FEC filings were now looking. They were typing "Citizens for Waters" into the Federal Election Commission website. They were finding the payments, Progressive Connections, Karen Waters, Slate mailer management fees, 8,000 here, 16,000 there, 250,000 in a single cycle. They did the math. They compared it to what they donated. $50, $100, money they'd given because they believed it would help their community. Money that had ended up, dollar by documented dollar, in the bank account of their representative's daughter. Bongino had said it plainly. "I'm not attacking anyone. I'm reading FEC filings." But FEC filings, it turned out, were the most devastating attack of all, because they couldn't be denied. They couldn't be spun. They couldn't be called racist or partisan or weaponized. They were numbers, filed by Waters' own campaign, available to anyone with an internet connection. And the numbers told a story that 35 years of speeches and slogan and righteous fury couldn't rewrite. The story of a woman who spoke for the poor and spent for the family, the people's money, the family's business, and a cop from East New York who read the difference out loud. Before we continue, if you're finding this story compelling, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. These are the stories the mainstream media won't tell you, the receipts they won't show you, the questions they won't ask. And we're just getting started. The congressional hearing had ended at 2:15 in the afternoon. By 2:30, every major news network had footage. By 3, the clips were categorized, edited, and ready for broadcast. By 4, the narratives had formed. Conservative outlets led with Bongino destroys Waters with her own financial records. Progressive outlets countered with Waters confronts Trump FBI appointee in heated exchange. But the narratives, carefully constructed by producers and editors and political strategists, didn't matter as much as they once did. Because by 5 o'clock, the raw footage was everywhere. Unedited, unfiltered, unspun. 40 million people didn't need a network to tell them what to think about a congresswoman whose campaign paid her daughter $1.2 million. They could watch the hearing themselves. They could pull up the FEC filings themselves. They could do the math themselves. And they did. The traditional media cycle, the one where networks control the narrative and talking heads frame the debate, had been replaced by something more immediate and more dangerous to politicians who rely on image management. Direct access, raw footage, primary sources. The people didn't need to trust CNN or Fox to interpret what happened. They could watch Bongino read the numbers. They could watch Waters' face when he did. They could search progressive connections on the FEC website and see the same numbers Bongino cited. This was the new accountability, not filtered through partisan media, not softened by friendly interviewers, not buried in the back pages of newspapers that nobody reads anymore. Direct, immediate, verifiable. Waters' press secretary, a woman named Zara Mitchell who had managed crisis communications for 3 Democratic senators before joining Waters' team, understood the problem immediately. She'd been in the gallery during the hearing. She'd watched the room change. She'd seen the cameras shift. She'd felt the moment when Waters lost control of the narrative. Now she sat in a conference room in the Rayburn building with Waters' chief of staff, her communications director, 2 senior advisors, and a crisis management consultant who charged $3,000 an hour and was worth every penny of it in situations exactly like this one. The consultant, a former network news producer named David Brennan, pulled up the social media analytics on a large monitor. The numbers were catastrophic. The FEC filing clip, he said, has 15 million views and climbing. The credentials reversal has 12 million. The SBF moment has 18 million. The full summary has been shared 41 million times. 41 million. Do you understand what that means? Mitchell understood perfectly. 41 million shares meant the video had escaped containment. It wasn't just conservative media anymore. It wasn't just political junkies. It was everywhere. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, group chats, email forwards, text messages. The video had achieved the one thing that every political operative fears and every opposition researcher dreams of: viral saturation. The race card isn't working, Brennan continued. Bongino protected Obama. He worked East New York. He quoted Chuck Schumer. Every defense we try, he's already immunized against. We call him racist, people bring up Obama. We call it partisan, people bring up Schumer. We say it's an attack, people say it's FEC filings. What do we have? Waters asked. Her voice was tight, controlled. The voice of a woman who has been in politics long enough to know when she's in trouble but disciplined enough not to show it. Brennan pulled up a document. Here's what we can work with. Bongino's podcast has said controversial things. We can compile clips. He's been critical of the FBI in the past. We can call him a hypocrite. He supported Trump. We can tie him to January 6th. He failed 3 congressional campaigns. We can question his political judgment. Will any of that work? Mitchell asked. Brennan was quiet for a moment. In crisis communications, silence is more honest than spin. Not against the receipts, he said finally. The problem isn't what he said. It's what he proved. 1.2 million to your daughter is a fact. 12 million to your husband's bank is a fact. Living outside your district is a fact. Calling SBF candid is on video. The judge calling your behavior abhorrent is in the court transcript. We're not fighting opinions. We're fighting arithmetic. So what's the play? Waters' chief of staff asked. Brennan clicked to the next slide. We go on offense. We make this about Trump, about weaponization, about attacks on black leaders. We bring in the Congressional Black Caucus. We bring in civil rights leaders. We make it bigger than the numbers. And if people ask about the 1.2 million, we explain slate mailers. We show that Karen Waters runs a legitimate business. We emphasize that everything was legal and properly disclosed. Mitchell shook her head. That's not going to work. Why not? Because legal doesn't mean ethical, and properly disclosed doesn't mean the people who donated knew their money was going to the congresswoman's daughter. Bongino already made that point. He said the operation is technically legal. He's not accusing her of a crime. He's accusing her of a betrayal. So we're admitting defeat. We're acknowledging reality. The numbers are out there. The FEC filings are public. Trying to deny them or spin them makes us look like we're hiding something, which proves Bongino's point. Then what do you suggest? Waters asked. Mitchell pulled out her phone and showed them a video. The laundromat owner from Inglewood, 9 million views. This, Mitchell said, is our real problem. Not Bongino, not the Republicans, not Fox News. Our real problem is that the people who donated to you are doing the math. $50 times 24,000 shirts. That's what the woman said. She turned her donation into labor hours, into shirts pressed, and then she compared it to 1.2 million for pamphlets. We can survive Bongino. We can survive the Republicans. We can survive the news cycle. But if we lose the district, if the people who have been voting for you for 35 years start asking where their money went, that's a different problem. Waters leaned back in her chair. For the first time since the hearing, she looked tired, not defeated. Maxine Waters didn't do defeat, but tired in the way that fighters get tired in the later rounds when they realize the opponent is better than they thought and the fight is going to be harder than they planned. What do the internal polls say? She asked. We don't have internals yet, but the national numbers are bad. 68% of people who watched the clip believe Bongino raised legitimate concerns. Among Democrats, it's 41%. Among independents, 79%. And in the district, we'll know in 48 hours. But if I had to guess, based on the social media reaction from constituents, it's not good. Define not good. People are angry, not at Bongino, at you. The room went quiet. Waters stared at the monitor, at the analytics, at the numbers that measured her political capital in real time. 15 million views, 41 million shares, 9 million views of a woman pressing shirts who wanted to know why her $50 went to pamphlets. She'd survived scandals before, the ethics investigation, the One United controversy, the calls for her to be censured. She'd survived because she had something those scandals didn't threaten: the brand, anti-Maxine, the fighter, the voice of the people. But Bongino hadn't attacked the brand. He'd used the brand against itself. He'd taken the voice of the people and shown that the voice was a business. He'd taken the fighter for the poor and shown the math. 1.2 million to the daughter, $5 million mansion, 27% poverty rate in the district. The contrast was too stark. The arithmetic was too simple, and the people who had believed in the brand were now looking at the receipts. How do we fix this? Waters asked. Brennan closed his laptop. Congresswoman, with respect, I'm not sure we can. Not in the short term. The video is everywhere. The numbers are verified. The narrative is set. What we can do is manage the damage, control the bleeding, and position you for recovery. But fixing it, making people unsee what they've seen, that's not something we can do with a press conference or a statement or a media tour. That requires time, and it requires you to address the substance, not just the optics. Meaning people want to know why your daughter got $1.2 million. They want to know why you live in Hancock Park. They want to know why you called SBF candid. And until you answer those questions in a way that makes sense to the woman pressing shirts in Inglewood, the narrative isn't going to change. I've answered those questions 100 times. With all due respect, Congresswoman, you haven't. You've dismissed them. You've called them attacks. You've said everything was legal, but you haven't explained why. Why your daughter? Why that much money? Why pamphlets? And legal isn't enough anymore. People understand that legal and ethical aren't the same thing. Bongino made that distinction very clearly. Waters stood up. The meeting's over. The staff exchanged glances. Nobody moved. I said the meeting's over. They filed out. Mitchell stayed. You need to talk to Karen, Mitchell said quietly. Why? Because if Progressive Connections can't justify that $1.2 million with receipts, with actual work product, with deliverables that match the dollar amount, this gets worse. Right now, people are suspicious. If it comes out that the value wasn't there, that the payments were inflated, that this was a way to route campaign money to family, suspicious becomes certain. Karen runs a legitimate business. Then prove it. Show the work. Show what Progressive Connections actually did for $1.2 million over 20 years. Show the mailers. Show the distribution. Show the voter contact. Show something that justifies the number. Because right now, all people see is $1 million in pamphlets. And pamphlets don't cost $1 million. Waters looked at her press secretary. Mitchell had been with her for 6 years. Loyal, competent, discreet. She trusted her as much as she trusted anyone in this business. What do you really think? Waters asked. I think, Mitchell said, that for 35 years you've been untouchable. You've said things that would have ended other careers. You've survived ethics investigations. You've faced censure votes. And you've always come out stronger because your base believed in you. They believed you were fighting for them. But Bongino didn't attack your politics. He attacked your credibility. And credibility, once it's damaged, is very hard to repair. The people in your district are asking questions they've never asked before. Where did my money go? Who benefited? Was I helping the community or was I helping the congresswoman's family? Those questions, once asked, don't go away. Across town, in his office at FBI headquarters, Bongino was in a meeting that had nothing to do with Maxine Waters. The assistant director of the counterterrorism division was briefing him on a developing situation in the Midwest. 3 suspects, possible connections to foreign actors, ongoing surveillance. Bongino listened, asked questions, made decisions. The hearing was over, the clip was viral, the damage was done, there was work to do. His phone buzzed, a text from Webb. You've been invited on every major news show. Fox, CNN, MSNBC, NBC, ABC, they all want you tonight. Bongino typed back, decline all, no comment. Webb replied immediately, are you sure? This is a huge opportunity. Bongino thought for a moment, then typed, the receipts speak for themselves, I don't need to. He put the phone down and returned his attention to the counterterrorism briefing. This was the difference. Waters needed the media. She needed the attention. She needed the platform to maintain the brand. Bongino didn't. He had the receipts. And receipts don't need commentary. By 6 o'clock, the story had evolved beyond the hearing. Investigative reporters smelling blood started digging, not into Bongino, into Waters. A reporter from the Washington Post pulled 20 years of FEC filings and created a comprehensive database of every payment from citizens for Waters to Progressive Connections. The amounts, the dates, the election cycles, the pattern. What he found was striking. The payments increased over time. In the early years 2003 through 2007, the amounts were relatively modest. $8,000 here, $12,000 there. Reasonable for a small campaign operation. But starting in 2008, the year of the One United scandal, the amounts jumped. $25,000, $30,000, $40,000. By 2016, single payments exceeded $100,000. In 2020, a single election cycle, the total was $250,000. The reporter did what Bongino had done. He compared the payments to industry standards. He called political consultants. He asked what slate mailer operations typically cost. The answer was consistent. A robust slate mailer operation for a congressional district might cost $20,000 to $30,000 per cycle, maybe $50,000 in a competitive race. Waters' district wasn't competitive. She'd won every election since 1991 by margins exceeding 70%. Some years, she ran unopposed. So why was she paying her daughter $250,000 in a single cycle for slate mailers in a district where she had no real opposition? The reporter couldn't answer that question. but he could publish the data, which he did. The article ran the next morning under the headline "The Family Business, the Maxine Waters Money Trail." It was thorough, it was documented, it was devastating. A reporter from the Los Angeles Times took a different angle. She focused on the district. She drove through South Central, Inglewood, Compton. She talked to constituents. She visited the schools. She photographed the streets. What she found matched Bongino's description exactly. Aging schools, potholed roads, a 27% poverty rate, and a congresswoman who lived miles away in one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in Los Angeles. The article included interviews with a dozen constituents: teachers, small business owners, community organizers, retired workers, people who had voted for Waters for decades. The quotes were simple, direct, heartbreaking. "I gave her money because I thought she was helping us. I've been voting for her since I was 18. I'm 53 now. The neighborhood looks exactly the same. She talks about fighting for the poor, but she doesn't live here. She doesn't send her family here. She doesn't shop here. How do you fight for people you don't live with?" The article ran with the headline "Forgotten District: How Maxine Waters Built a Career on South Central While Living in Hancock Park." A team of reporters from ProPublica went even deeper. They obtained records from the House Ethics Committee investigation into the One United scandal. They interviewed former committee staffers. They reviewed the timeline. What emerged was a pattern that aligned perfectly with Bongino's accusations. Waters had arranged the Treasury meeting. Her husband stood to benefit. Her grandson, working in her office, had pushed for the bailout. When the ethics investigation started, Waters claimed she'd recused herself. The grandson took responsibility. The committee cleared Waters. The grandson got a letter of reproval. But ProPublica found something else. Testimony from Treasury officials who said Waters had personally called them to advocate for One United. Emails from her office with her grandson's name on them, but language that staffers said sounded like Waters herself. A pattern of behavior that suggested the congresswoman was more involved than she'd claimed. The Ethics Committee had access to all of this. They chose to accept Waters's explanation and her grandson's acceptance of responsibility. ProPublica asked a former federal prosecutor to review the case. His assessment was blunt. If this were a criminal investigation, the pattern would be concerning. The principal claims ignorance. The family member takes the fall. The financial benefit stays in the family. It's a classic structure for avoiding accountability. The Ethics Committee is not a court of law. They made a political decision. But the pattern is there for anyone who wants to see it. The article ran under the headline "The One United Case: How Maxine Waters Avoided Accountability When Her Family Stood to Benefit." By the end of the week, the media landscape had shifted entirely. What started as a viral clip from a congressional hearing had become a comprehensive investigation into 3 decades of Maxine Waters' financial relationships with her family. And every piece of reporting came back to the same conclusion Bongino had reached in 8 minutes of testimony. The pattern is always the same. Money comes in from small donors. Money goes out to family members. The operation is technically legal. The people who funded it never know where their money went. Waters fought back. She did the media tour Brennan had recommended. She went on MSNBC and called it a coordinated attack. She went on CNN and said it was about race. She held a rally in South Central and said she would not be intimidated. But every interview, every appearance, every rally came back to the same questions. Why did your daughter receive $1.2 million? Why do you live outside your district? Why did you call SBF candid? And Waters, for all her rhetorical skill, for all her experience, for all her political instinct, could not answer those questions in a way that satisfied the people asking them. Because the questions weren't about politics, they were about arithmetic, and arithmetic doesn't care about rhetoric. In the 43rd Congressional District, something was happening that hadn't happened in 30 years. People were paying attention, not to the speeches, not to the slogans, not to the cable news appearances, to the numbers. Community organizers started hosting meetings. Town halls where people could ask questions about the FEC filings, about progressive connections, about where their donations had gone. A group of teachers created a website. They called it Receipts for the District. They compiled every FEC filing, every payment to progressive connections, every dollar that went from Citizens for Waters to Karen Waters. Then they did something brilliant. They created a calculator. Users could enter how much they donated to Waters over the years. The calculator would show them what percentage of their donation went to her daughter. And then it would show them what that money could have bought for the district. $50 donated, $4.50 to Karen Waters, that's 3 textbooks. $100 donated, $9 to Karen Waters, that's 6 school lunches. $500 donated, $45 to Karen Waters, that's 3 winter coats for kids who need them. The calculator went viral. Within 48 hours, 200,000 people had used it. Within a week, it had been featured on local news. Within 2 weeks, it was national. And every person who used the calculator came away with the same understanding. Their money they'd given to help their community, had been rooted through a family business that benefited the Congresswoman's daughter. Waters's polling numbers started to move, not dramatically, not overnight, but steadily, week by week. The approval rating that had been locked at 72% for a decade started to decline. 70, 68, 65. More concerning, the trust numbers collapsed. When asked, do you trust Maxine Waters to fight for your interests, the yes responses dropped from 68% to 41% in 3 weeks. Mitchell showed Waters the numbers in a quiet meeting, just the two of them. What does this mean? Waters asked. It means, Mitchell said carefully, that for the first time in your career, the people in your district are questioning whether you're fighting for them or for your family. I've given my life to this district. I know, but they don't see your life. They see the numbers. $1.2 million to your daughter, $5 million mansion, 27% poverty rate. Those numbers tell a story. And right now, that story is louder than yours. What do I do? You answer the question. Which question? The only question that matters. Why? Why did your daughter get that money? Not that it was legal, not that it was disclosed, but why her? Why that much? Why not use that money differently? Until you answer that, the narrative doesn't change. Waters looked at her press secretary. You think I've lost them. I think you're losing them. There's a difference. How do I get them back? The same way you got them in the first place. By convincing them that you're on their side. But this time you can't just say it. You have to prove it with transparency, with accountability, with answers. Or you become what Bongino said you are. A brand built on poverty while profiting from the people you claim to serve. The silence in the room was heavy. Finally, Waters spoke. Set up a meeting with Karen. Mitchell nodded. I'll arrange it. But as she left the office, she wondered if it was already too late. The receipts were out. The calculator was viral. The people were doing the math. And in politics, as in life, some damage can't be undone. 3 weeks after the hearing, Bongino was back at FBI headquarters, reviewing a case file on a multi-state fraud ring, when Webb knocked on his door. You need to see this, Webb said. He pulled up a video on his tablet. It was from a town hall in Compton. Maxine Waters was on stage. The room was full, but the energy was different, not hostile, but not friendly either. Questioning. A woman stood up, middle-aged, wearing scrubs, a nurse. Congresswoman, she said, I've voted for you since I was 22. I'm 49 now. I've donated every year, not much. $50 usually, sometimes $100. I just found out that over the years, about 10% of what I gave you went to your daughter's company. I didn't know that. Nobody told me that. I don't care if it's legal. I care that you didn't tell me. I care that I thought my money was going to help my community and it was going to your family. I'm a nurse. I work 60-hour weeks. $50 is real money to me, and I gave it to you because I trusted you. Do you understand why that trust is broken? The room was silent. Waters looked at the woman. For a moment, just a moment, the mask slipped. The politician disappeared. What was left was a 70-year-old woman who'd been in Congress for 35 years and who'd just been asked a question she couldn't spin away. "I understand," Waters said quietly. "Then why?" the woman asked. "Why your daughter?" Waters opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. Because she started and stopped. She couldn't answer. Not in a way that would satisfy the woman in scrubs who worked 60-hour weeks and gave $50 because she believed it would help. The video ended. Bongino looked at Webb. "That's what accountability looks like." Webb nodded. "When it comes from the people who were hurt." "That woman didn't need me to tell her about the FEC filings," Bongino said. "She looked them up herself. She did the math herself. She came to her own conclusion. That's the point. I didn't convince her. The receipts did." He closed the tablet. Power doesn't fear politicians. It doesn't fear the media. It doesn't even fear the law. Power fears arithmetic, because arithmetic can't be spun. $1.2 million to a daughter for pamphlets in a district with a 27% poverty rate. That's not a talking point. That's math. And math is the same for everyone. The nurse in Compton sees the same numbers I saw. She reaches the same conclusion. Not because I told her what to think, but because she can count. That's accountability. Not from the top down, from the bottom up. Webb was quiet for a moment. "Do you think she'll survive this?" "Politically, probably. She's in a safe district. The party will protect her. The Congressional Black Caucus will defend her. The base is loyal. But that woman in scrubs, the one asking why, she's not going away. And there are thousands more like her. People who trusted Waters and who now have questions they can't ignore. That's the real damage, not to her career, to her legacy. She wanted to be remembered as a champion of the poor. Now she'll be remembered as the congresswoman whose daughter got rich from their donations." That's what happens when the receipts come out. And in the 43rd Congressional District of California, the receipts were everywhere. On websites, in calculators, in conversations, in town halls, in the questions that wouldn't stop coming. How much money went to your daughter? Why do you live outside the district? Why did you call the man who stole $8 billion candid? Questions that had simple answers. Answers that were all public record. Answers that Maxine Waters couldn't give without admitting what everyone already knew. The brand was a business, and the business had been very good to the family. 6 months after the hearing, the political landscape had settled into a new normal. Waters was still in office, still giving interviews, still holding rallies, still claiming to fight for the poor. But something had changed. The crowds were smaller, the donations were down, the trust was broken. A primary challenger emerged, a young progressive, a community organizer from South Central who'd grown up in the district and still lived there. Her platform was simple: transparency, accountability, a representative who lives in the district she represents. She didn't attack Waters directly. She didn't need to. She just talked about the numbers. $1.2 million. That's what the previous congresswoman paid her daughter over 20 years. Here's what I'll do with campaign money. I'll show you every dollar, every expense, every decision. Because your money should help you, not my family. The message resonated, not with everyone, not enough to unseat Waters, not yet. But the polls showed something interesting. Among voters under 40, the challenger was winning. Among voters who'd used the receipts for the district calculator, the challenger was winning by 20 points. The old guard was still loyal to Waters, but the future was asking questions. And in American politics, once people start asking questions, the answers eventually matter. Bongino watched it all from a distance. He didn't comment, didn't give interviews, didn't claim credit. He'd done what he'd set out to do: read the receipts, let the numbers speak. The rest was up to the people of the 43rd Congressional District, the people whose donations had funded a family business, the people whose poverty had built a brand, the people who'd been told for 35 years that someone was fighting for them while living in a $5 million mansion miles away. Those people were doing the math now. And math, as Bongino had learned in his years investigating financial fraud, always wins in the end. Not immediately, not dramatically, but inevitably. Because you can spin a narrative, you can craft a message, you can build a brand. But you can't spin arithmetic. $1.2 million to a daughter for pamphlets. $12 million to a husband's bank. $5 million mansion outside the district. 27% poverty rate inside it. The numbers don't lie. They don't spin. They don't care about politics or race or party or legacy. They just are. And in a hearing room in the Rayburn building, in front of 40 million people watching on screens across the country, a cop from East New York had read those numbers out loud, not to destroy Maxine Waters, but to give the people in her district what they deserved. The truth, in black and white, filed with the Federal Election Commission, available to anyone who wanted to look. The receipts. And once people saw the receipts, they couldn't unsee them. That was the power, not in the attack, not in the theatrics, not in the viral moment. In the arithmetic, the simple, undeniable, devastating arithmetic of a 35-year career built on fighting poverty while extracting wealth. The Congresswoman's time had expired, but the receipts would last forever.